Hello, my name is Liana Perez Pantoja, and growing up, and even now in my life, I always go and visit my family in Mexico. I go pretty often, and I remember in my childhood how much I would struggle with the amount of food that we would eat whenever I would go visit. So my family would get together to eat 3 meals a day, every single member of our extended family, and every single meal was a big deal. It was a lot of food, and naturally I don't tend to get very hungry, so this was a hard time for me. But as I've grown up, I've realized that these meals were about so much more than just food. It was an opportunity for our whole family to get together at least once a day, and this is something that I really miss about my culture whenever I come to the US. I say this because this is a big theme I really saw reflected in the 2001 film Tortilla Soup, which uses food as a central image as it tells the story of a family coming to accept the complex intersection between culture, identity, independence, and tradition. Ultimately, it is a story about Chicano identity and how a merging of cultures allows people to live authentically and find their voices. The movie follows a widowed father, semi-retired chef, Martin, who cooks dinner every single night for his 3 adult daughters who all live with him. Leticia is the oldest daughter and the most tied to tradition, and this is mostly seen through her religion as well as her timidness around romance that is explored through the film. Carmen, the middle daughter, is a successful businesswoman with a secret passion revealed for cooking. Maribel, the youngest daughter, is the most outspoken about breaking tradition, and she's unsure about going to college throughout the film. One scene that stands out to me is the scene towards the beginning of the movie where the 3 sisters are cleaning up after dinner and they start breaking plates. It serves as a way to understand all of the girls' attitudes towards culture and tradition. The plates symbolize the family coming together for dinner and eating traditional food, as they do every single night, yet Maribel is the first to break one of the plates. She's bold in doing so, and she even finds the whole situation amusing and funny. Leticia, on the other hand, is entirely opposed to breaking the plates. And then Carmen doesn't really want to break the plates, but seems to enjoy watching Maribel do so, as she sort of laughs and finds it interesting. But by the end of the scene, all the sisters are having fun and letting themselves be more careless, but the scene really serves as an allegory for their individual journeys, and the hesitancy or the lack of hesitancy that each sister has in approaching this negotiation of culture between tradition and sort of individual identity. Out of all of the sisters, though, I think that this negotiation is best reflected in Carmen's story arc, which is centered around the difficulty she faces, specifically with her own independence. So at the beginning of the film, it appears that she's going to be the first sister to move out since she's signed a lease, and she later gets a job opportunity to go to Barcelona. But she's actually the last to move out, and she chooses to pursue her dream of cooking instead of her business job that was sort of pushed onto her by her father. So it's heavily implied throughout the film with dialogue that her sisters make, that Carmen is unhappy or only living a certain lifestyle in order to please Martin. This is most clear whenever Carmen is revealed to have an interest in cooking, first whenever she cooks a meal for her love interest. Her dishes represent her Chicano identity as they are a mix of many cuisines, and Carmen even says that her father calls her dishes mats, implying how Martin is resistant to the cultural change Carmen is trying to embody. By the end of the film, triggered by the death of her Tío Gómez, a chef that worked with Martin, she expresses that her father has never really asked her what she wants or how she feels. Carmen reaches a point by the end of the film where she's embraced her own desires when she decides not to go to Barcelona and instead open up her own restaurant. With Martin, his journey is a little more complicated because unlike his daughter, he does not want to break away from tradition, but finds himself in a position where he must adapt to his changing life. The film takes place 15 years after the death of his wife, and while very little is said about his late wife, it is sort of implied that Martin blames the restaurant for her death. Later in the film, Gomez also dies in the kitchen, further entrenching the environment in death. For Martin, allowing his daughters to break tradition, allowing himself to find new love, to move away from the kitchen, or even to taste food, are all things that he's blocked out because he's stuck in a way of living that he associates with a time when he still had his wife. This tension is showcased through mise en scène in a scene where he's dancing with Hortensia, his implied love interest. In this scene, you can see the dining room with 3 chairs representing his 3 daughters, as well as family portraits up on the wall, but they're sort of cast in a shadow in the foreground, where in the other room we see this lively, colorful scene where he's dancing. From this scene, we get the impression that Martin wants to move on, and allow himself to live a new life, but his family and his grief remain heavy in the background of his life. We see him resolve this internal conflict by the end of the film, after all his daughters seem to have paved paths for themselves, and he is forced to reconcile with the losses he's experiences, ultimately choosing to move on to get a new life when he sells the house and proposes to Yolanda. In this way, he's breaking cultural expectations, just as his daughters have by this point in the movie. While there's much more I could say about this movie, because truly every single character goes through a big transformation and ends up with their own unique personal understanding of their voices, culture, and identity, I think that Martin and Carmen are really the best characters that have an arc that represents this transformation. They don't simply reject the culture that they were raised in, but instead every single one of the characters finds pieces of it that they cannot live without. So for Leticia, that's her religion and her value for marriage. For Maribel, that's her home life structure and eventually her choice to go to college. And then for Carmen, that's a love of food and community, which she learned directly from her father, Martin. Even Martin gets to live a new life as he steps away from the kitchen and is focused on his relationship with Yolanda. At the end of the film, they all come together to eat at Carmen's restaurant, Nuevo Latino. And this name itself sort of shows how they've all sort of collaboratively determined how they each want to understand their own identities. We see how tradition and culture can coexist in their lives in a reinvented form, and how by embracing change, they're all better able to connect as a family over food. So, thank you for listening.